Welcome to Conversations in Agriculture. My name is Conrad Weaver. I'm your host for the program today, and we are going to be joined in just a little bit by a special guest from the Daugherty Water for Food Global Institute. Just a little bit about Conversations in Agriculture. So I decided to launch this program a few weeks ago, actually now a few months ago, just to help connect consumers with farmers. I think it's important for us to know where our food comes from, how it gets produced, and how it gets to our table. And so I bring on leaders in agriculture, farmers, and others who have vested interest in agriculture and telling the agriculture story. And so I have a background in farming. I grew up on a dairy farm in Northeast Ohio, and so agriculture has been in my blood for many years. And so thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here and participate. In fact, this is a participation sport. So if you have a comment or a question for our guest, put it in the comments below. Whether you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube, you can put those comments in there, and I will get them. And as we have time, we will field those questions to our guests today. Also, if you enjoy these programs, please give us a like and like the page and share it with your friends and your network. It's really important for us to get the word out to help people understand where their food comes from and how it gets produced. So if you like it, hit the like button and share it. I really appreciate that. Today, we are being joined by a very special guest, and I'm going to bring him onto the screen. I am joined by Peter McCornick. And Peter is the President, Executive Director of the Daugherty Water for Food Global Institute at the University of Nebraska. And he's a tenured professor there, and he's been doing a lot of work around the world when it comes to water and water issues. Peter, welcome to Conversations in Agriculture.
Thank you, Conrad. Very glad to be here.
So tell me, what is the Daugherty Water for Food Global Institute, and what is your mission?
Yeah, the Daugherty Water for Food Global Institute was established. This is actually our 10-year anniversary. It was established with a founding gift from the Robert B. Daugherty Foundation here in Omaha, in Nebraska. And it was established as an ambitious institute with a mission of a water and food secure world, with the aim of building on the expertise and experience in Nebraska around agriculture and water, focusing on helping Nebraska develop further around these issues, but also how we can work nationally in the U.S. and how we can support and help partners and colleagues in key agricultural producing parts of the world where water is increasingly a challenge.
So I have to, just a little side note here, I have to say that you have a very interesting Nebraska accent.
Yes. I come from a little further east. I'm from southwest Scotland, a somewhat wetter part of the world.
And so what has been your interest in, first of all, in agriculture and then specifically in the water issues around the world? What's kind of sparked that interest in you?
Oh, I grew up on a farm. I was very much involved in agriculture from a very early age with my father and mother and my brothers. All my brothers still farm in southwest Scotland. I was sort of steeped in agriculture, but I also had an interest to see the world, to get engaged in around the world. So my training is in engineering. I engaged in working internationally in agriculture, in water, and then did my graduate studies in the United States, in Colorado. That helped then fuel that further to continue working in these issues.
So why is water such a critical issue around the world?
I think the challenge with water now is as the population has grown, the economies are growing. We have changing climate in many parts of the world. Water is becoming increasingly scarce or in demand for other sectors, for urban use, for drinking water, for commercial, industrial use, and agriculture. Agriculture is by far the largest user to produce the food we need. And so as our food grows, our food demand grows, as our diets change, the demands on water in different parts of the world changes, and it is increasing. And although we've done a lot to reduce how much water we use, because of these increasing demands, we still see a constant further demand on the water that we have available. And so, particularly in the drier parts of the world, this becomes particularly difficult to manage.
Mm-hmm. So what is the state of water availability around the world? I mean, you've lived in a bunch of different places, and so what's that look like on a global scale?
It's changing just about everywhere that I'm familiar with in one way or another. So in some places we have not enough water, as I mentioned. So I spent time in the Middle East, and that's certainly a part of the world where water has been, not only has the demand been increasing from the population growth and other the economies growing, but again, the changing climate there in that part of the world. Other areas like Bangladesh, the water, there's too much water much of the year. Sometimes there's not enough, but other times of the year there's far too much, and you get major flooding and months where important agricultural land is underwater, and makes that very difficult to produce food. Here in Nebraska, we've seen all those extremes. I mean, Nebraska goes from a pretty wet state on the east side where we are to the west side where it's quite dry. And yet we've experienced in 2012, we had a very severe drought. And then last year we had this very catastrophic flood particularly in the eastern part of the state that did quite a lot of damage to the agricultural systems.
You know, this morning I was looking at the U.S. Drought Monitor, and I'm going to bring that on screen here. And for some reason that's not showing up properly. I'm going to reboot here and bring it up in a different way. But it looks like, you know, we have a very severe drought issue in America, and it's growing. I'm trying to bring this up on the screen here. Here it is. Hang on one second. Here we go.
There you go.
Yeah, so it looks like, you know, this big red dot here that extends into 4 or 5 different states is really growing. And then you see some of the drought coming up into Nebraska as well. What's happening there, and how is that going to impact food production in the U.S.?
Well, I think in terms of comparison, say with 2012, it's not as widespread. This could change, and it could keep changing. I don't know these. Interestingly, the National Drought Monitor was a tool that was developed here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and is housed here, although it's put together by many different universities and partners across the U.S. Here, I don't know the specifics of where this is actually trending at the moment, and what we can expect as this goes forward. That drought, we're looking at northern Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, parts of Colorado, certainly dry parts of the United States. And one of the issues here that also makes this more troublesome is this is the part of the Ogallala aquifer. The groundwater is not as rich as say here in Nebraska, and so the capacity to manage that drought is less in those areas. So certainly that's a part of the world where we're dependent on the rainfall more perhaps than the irrigation, and certainly will impact that area. Impact at the national level, I'm not sure. Again, as we have different parts of the world, we don't have drought in the southeast of the U.S. It's maybe not quite emerging here in the further north in the U.S. Again, there will be some impact on the food systems, but whether that be severe, I would have to look a lot more closely at the data on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I know there are trouble spots around the world that are more impacted than others. You know, where are some of those population centers that have the biggest problems, and where the biggest problem threats exist? You know, where food insecurity, perhaps largely because of drought areas. Where are some of those areas?
Well, I mean, there's about 800 million, close to 1 billion people that are still considered food insecure around the world, and that likely has gone up with the COVID crisis as well. And these are in different parts of the world. We even have people food insecure in the United States. but the vast majority tend to be in the developing world, and in those, many of those people are in parts of the world where they happen to be the driest river basins in the world, parts of Africa, South Asia, and so they are, the areas are water short. The economic capacity there to develop agriculture and to intensify agriculture is low. And so the capacity to increase agricultural production, even if they had water, is not as good as it could be. And then the capabilities there to continue expanding agricultural production needs strengthening.
So we have a question here from Molly. It said, how can groundwater management policies help mitigate the effects of drought and floods?
Well, I think the groundwater itself, this is one of the points there I was trying to expand on a little bit with, say, southern Oklahoma and northern Texas. The groundwater itself is a good water bank, and it basically allows us to store water underground, either by natural rainfall getting into the groundwater, or we can look at artificial ways of recharging it. The managing that well and having that available for future use or during times when droughts come, the management of that allows us to manage through the drought. Again, this depends a lot on how Mother Nature has benefited that particular part of the country. But during the 2012 drought, the western part of Nebraska, where there is good groundwater, the irrigation has been developed, it did better through that period than, say, the eastern part, where they're more used to rainfall, and the rainfall fell short, and the groundwater had not been developed, and there's not so much groundwater there either. Mm-hmm. So it's an important resource to help manage through the droughts and to help the floods actually help recharge the groundwater to build up that savings bank of water. And so managing that groundwater carefully is something that can, if the local situations allow, really help that region manage itself through a drought.
So how are farmers doing, both here in the United States and around the world when it comes to managing groundwater? What are some of the practices they're doing? What can they do to improve? What should they do to improve?
There's a lot of challenges around that. Culture and the development of the groundwater can happen. It doesn't require community organizations to manage groundwater. It's a case of, if you have the energy and you can actually access the groundwater, you can start pumping it. If you don't have a regulatory system or a permit system or something to at least limit how much groundwater is managed. So we've got parts of the world where there support for the Green Revolution, for producing food during the 70s and 80s for India. And then as that continued to develop, the government provided cheaper electricity. More and more of the groundwater got pumped, and that groundwater has fallen in many places to very severe levels. Some states in India really haven't yet got that under control. Other states like Gujarat in the western part of the country have managed to regulate that. They've come up with technological solutions to do that, and policy ideas. Same here in Nebraska. Although we're on the Ogallala Aquifer, we are in a situation here where we do have the recharge from the sandhills in the northern part of the state. We have good water resources. And in the 1970s, recognizing the same kind of issues that were happening in India were also beginning to happen. The state resource districts, and so it's managed at the local level with state oversight, but with the local participation, local boards, and that collectively has helped stabilize the groundwater and then manage that. Basically monitoring whether it's going up and down, being there for when the droughts come, but also making sure it gets recharged in the wetter years. And that's Nebraska and other states in the western US. California is now looking at this because of their experience during the drought. How can they manage their groundwater better to help through drought situations like they experienced a few years ago?
Mm-hmm. And if you're watching, you may see some glitches on our feed, so we apologize for that. But that's the nature of doing these interviews via the internet. Uh, so, Peter, what have been some of the most exciting advancements in agriculture that have impacted the farmer's ability to grow more food with less water? What are some of those things you're seeing farmers are doing?
It's a big answer. There's a lot to it. We just finished a study last year looking at water productivity in Nebraska agriculture, and this was really because we've got so much data here, a long history of being in the research and gathering and monitoring the water and the agriculture. One of the intriguing or important findings there was just how important crop breeding, livestock breeding, management practices, field practices, how important that had been in actually truly saving water, and quite remarkable improvements in water. And that's true in other states. It's really a national phenomenon, but it's here we were able to, because of the particular situation, we were able to really look at that pretty closely. Other parts of that, so it's the crop livestock piece is extraordinarily important in this. The actual water management around the development of center pivots and the application, the change in that technology. And now as we go into very carefully controlled systems where we can then link these to the satellite data, the use of drone, increasingly use of drone data and field measurements. At the moment, it's mostly getting translated to actual information to the farmers or apps that are then integrating those into the decision making, but also the opportunities with some new irrigation systems to be able to tie that directly into the software of the center pivots. And this is something we'll see in the next few years as the technology is now there. It's a case of the given situation with the economy of agriculture. It's not quite being taken up yet by many farmers. A few are adopting this, but it's something that will take a little bit more time to see uptake.
Mm-hmm. Do you think some of these technologies and some of these advancements, must continue to grow in parts of the world where perhaps they don't have the technology? I mean, do you think that there's these things that we can take them into Africa and in parts of Asia that in order to feed those growing populations?
Absolutely, and the same. They also can learn lessons from other parts of the world. On one of the tools that we've been working on here with partners is around measuring water from satellite imagery, the water use. This is technology that's been evolving over the last few years. It's something we were able to use in our studies here in Nebraska and use in the decision-making support in Nebraska itself. That technology, along with inputs from other data sources, we're now also applying it in the Middle East with the United States Agency for International Development, Drought Monitor, where we're able to take the drought monitor in the United States, working with the National Drought Monitoring Center, working with local partners in the Middle East, at the same time using our capacity to measure evapotranspiration from satellite imagery to replace some of the data gaps that we have in the Middle East. So now there, it's not going to be a nation that goes directly to say a center pivot or one farmer. It's there being then the use of that information with the water managers and the agricultural organizations and the ministries in conveying that information to their farmers and to their water managers.
Hmm. On your website, you have a section labeled "Managing Agriculture Drought." What's the difference between a drought, where there's limited rainfall, and an agriculture drought?
It's really, I mean, there's the meteorological drought or drought. Really, it's the change in the rainfall, the change in the. I was trying to, as you present, I was wondering if part of that drought would be associated with the snowpack in Colorado, but to some extent that may be so. So you've got the snowpack, you've got the rainfall. The snowpack is changing over time. So the drought would be where those pieces fell out of the average or were well below the average. And that's when and then over a certain time, how severe that drought would be. In the case of agricultural drought, it's really then what's the impacts of those changes in precipitation on the agriculture? How does this affect the soil moisture and for the crops? How does this affect the performance of those crops? Are they actually going to be able to produce a full yield, or are they going to be constrained, or are we going to lose the crop entirely? And so it's really the agricultural drought is then the impacts of those, the meteorological drought or the hydrological drought. That's the water available on the crops and ultimately on the livestock as well.
What are the things that you personally are most excited about in seeing whether it's technology or practice in American farmers? What are you most excited about?
I think it's, you say technology, practice, policy. I think there's actually, I'm excited about the coalescing of a lot of these ideas. So there's these ideas around measuring water from space, using drones to get a much higher resolution around it, the accuracy around what we're doing, and the capacity to be able to measure this when there's clouds in the sky that would normally impact satellites, but also as we're able to integrate that into the other pieces of information. Many of the farmers we work with struggle with how to then put all these pieces together and how we fit the water decision making into their agricultural farm business decision making. And I think it's the integration of all of those pieces and the people part of that. How do we actually get that so farmers can use that? Ideally, some of it would go to actually control the irrigation system, but ultimately it has to be the farmer making those decisions. But how can we integrate that into his decision making so he doesn't have 30, 40 apps on his telephone? Because that's really where some of the technology is still today. But also around the practices. I think one of the challenges with the groundwater is on the terms of the amount of water in the groundwater. Here in Nebraska, we've been doing quite well. On the quality side, we're further behind on that in terms of we have some areas where we have contamination of the groundwater. How do we address that? And that's much more, there's some technology inputs there, but it's then around the practices and the uptake of those practices by the farmers, how to make those work. And so there it's around the practices and working with those practices, making that information available to the farmers, and then working on the policy dimension with them, but really on this collaborative effort around trying to address these challenges before they become too difficult to address.
What are some of the biggest kind of hindrances to advancement in groundwater management, maybe from a policy standpoint? What are some of those things that are kind of the big blocks to that? Are there some things that are perhaps government regulations or excuse me, other things that can stifle that growth?
Yeah, to me, it's important that a lot of it is building the trust between the different parties around groundwater governance, groundwater management. How do you get there's on one hand, an oversimplification is to think we can regulate our way through these sort of situations, and that's really where India ran into lots of problems with this because they had so many small farmers, and trying to regulate with a top-down approach was very challenging. And then on the other hand, where there's basically individual farmers going ahead and continuing to do what they do without really paying attention to the stewardship of the water resources on their land, that ultimately will still end up with create another set of issues. So it's bringing those various parties, usually at the local level, and I think this is the story that's played out here in Nebraska and elsewhere in parts of the West, to come up with solutions that fit the local conditions. So here in Nebraska, for instance, the natural resource districts in the drier parts of the state functions quite differently under a similar framework, but they function quite differently in terms of how they regulate, how they manage the water, because they're so much more water short, and they have to make decisions around ensuring that groundwater is preserved. Whereas if further in the east, it's less challenging because there's more water available, but flooding is more of an issue, and even too much groundwater could be more an issue as well.
Hmm. You know, I saw a statistic the other day, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was staggering how many cities in America have serious issues with water and delivering
Yeah.
water to consumers, you know, and it's a growing challenge. And I think that it's going to take all of us working together to really preserve this limited natural resource, right?
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
so what as a consumer can I do? And I don't have a big farm where I'm pumping thousands of gallons of water. What can I do to, whether it's from a personal standpoint or from a legislative standpoint, what can I do to help move the needle in the right direction?
Um, as a consumer, I think in terms of the water, certainly is to conserve the water in your my farm in Nebraska remind me that we're using the same water system, and we're fully aware that the agriculture using the same water system. I think it is conserve the water in your household use. At the same time, be aware of the institutions and the organizations. So equally important to this as the technology and the decisions improvement and the policies is actually the organizations managing the water just beyond your city into the watersheds or onto the groundwater that that city draws its water supply from and impacts, because that city is also discharging wastewater or treated wastewater back into the water system downstream. So be aware of those institutions that you're likely voting for and are involved in, uh, and ultimately manage the water resource in that catchment. But also be aware of where your food comes from and where it's grown, and if it's being grown in ways that are sustainable, because the investments in the technology, the investments in the agriculture are important. The viability of the business models of to our food supplies. At the same time, the viability of water resources management, the institutions that manage the water resources, whether it's the natural resource districts, the water rights, the community managed watersheds, these are also equally important investments to ensure our water and food security.
Hmm. Well, these are some issues that, water is vital for life. And so all of us, whether we realize it or not, depend on water just to sustain life. And I think that because of that, I think all of us have a responsibility to participate, be active participants in
Yeah.
this issue. And so, what I know, the Water for Food Global Institute is doing amazing things there in Nebraska and around the world. What is next for your organization?
Well, it's a little hard looking at crystal balling at this point with what's going on with the lockdown or present situation. We are actively involved, as you said. We have actually been working with a number of partners on small scale, what's called farmer-led irrigation in Rwanda and elsewhere in sub-Saharan Africa, and that's an area where we see that continuing because a number of partners are very excited about the progress that's being made in that area. I think an important thing for us was that our conference. We're a 10-year-old institute. We have an annual conference, the Global Water for Food Conference, and this was scheduled for this coming October. We have had to postpone that for obvious reasons. We are putting on a series of virtual events around that, really focusing on the areas that our partners and ourselves see as priorities from water stewardship and managing those water resources for the ecosystems and public health to the actual technologies and potential advancements in that area. So we will continue to broadcast that. We've actually just had one webinar this last week where we were able to draw people from multiple countries around the world. So really a little silver lining from the COVID situation has been that by going virtual with this, we were actually able to draw in different partners that we hadn't been able to reach before. But we are looking to have our conference next year. and put that on next year and welcome many people here to Lincoln to really meet in person, because ultimately that's where we also come up with many of the new ideas to how we can really create impact on the ground, change the situation. It's really translating them, understand the research that's needed in terms of the farmers, and at the same time doing the research that can be translated to impact on the ground and change the situation.
Well, it's been, for me personally, it's been just a privilege to get to work with you guys. I know the Daugherty Water for Food Global Institute was a sponsor and partner with me in producing the documentary film Thirsty Land, which, by the way, is available on Amazon if anybody wants to see it. It's available on Amazon Prime. Go there. It's for free on Amazon Prime, and you can watch it there. And just being able to, I attended one of your global summits, and I think it was in Seattle a number of years ago, and that was just fascinating to hear what's going on around the world in the advancements of technology and in conservation efforts and in helping farmers everywhere be more productive in what they do, because all of us like to eat, all of us like to have food and fiber, those clothes to wear, and those things are vital around the world. And I think that if anyone wants more information about uh, the institute, Peter, where should they go?
To our website, waterforfood.edu. I go there, or set for but certainly I would start at the website, and if you simply Google water for food, you will get connected to that website as well.
Well, we missed some of that. You were breaking up there a little bit, but if you can go to waterforfood.edu and or just Google water for food, and you'll find it, and you'll learn more about what this about the important work that this institute is doing in Nebraska and around the world. Peter, thank you so much for joining us today and be part of our conversation. I really appreciate it. And when's the next time you get back to go home, if I can even talk today, to Scotland? Any travel plans back home? I'm not sure if I think maybe he's frozen up there. Sorry about that. I don't know if you heard me. Any plans to travel back home anytime soon?
I had planned to be there early August, but unfortunately we've had to. The equivalent to the county fair is something I tried to go back to most years, but it will stabilize before we make those plans.
Yeah. Well, travel has been hindered for all of
but
us.
But thankfully, we have.
Yeah, sorry about that. We're having a little technological difficulty here, so I apologize for that. But Peter, I want to say thank you so much for joining us and for taking time to be with us today. If you hang on for just a little bit, I'm going to wrap up some things, and then we'll come back and chat offline in just a minute. You've been watching and listening to the Conversations in Agriculture. My name is Conrad Weaver, and I'm so thankful that you decided to join us today for this conversation. Coming up in just a few, actually on Monday, we have a conversation with Pat O'Toole. Pat is the president of the Family Farm Alliance and the owner of Ladder Ranch in Savory, Wyoming. Pat has a really great insight into water and conservation and ranching, and he's going to be a great conversation Monday night on June 29th at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Be sure to join us for that. And then coming up in July, on Monday, July 20th, 9 p.m., 6 p.m. Pacific, is A.G. Kawamura. He is the founding co-chair of Solutions from the Land, and he's also the former Secretary of Agriculture for the state of California. A.G. will be joining us right here on Facebook and YouTube. Be sure to mark your calendars and join us for that conversation coming up soon. Today, we've had the privilege of having Peter McCornick with us from the Daugherty Water for Food Global Institute. Peter, again, thank you for joining us. And thank you the viewer for watching and for sharing and for liking our page.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it. And we will see you next time here on Conversations in Agriculture.